Welcome everybody to my podcast, Big Little Small Talk. I'm Megan O'Hara-Sullivan and I love to talk, but I also love to listen. If you're new here, welcome. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoy the episode. Hello listeners and welcome back to 2024 with Big Little Small Talk. My name's Megan O'Hara-Sullivan and we have a guest here today whose name is Mick Atzeni, and he is the president of the Toowoomba Bird Observers Club. Welcome, Mick.
Thank you, Megan. I'm pleased to be here.
Well, you're quite the celebrity. I hear that you've been interviewed all around town by the ABC, and I promise I'm not chasing their interviews. We've known each other for quite a while. Your parents came to my wedding. And I believe that your love of bird watching came from your father, Laurie. Is that right?
Well, Dad always encouraged it, but I sort of took it up seriously before he did. And we, of course, had our holidays at the Gold Coast back in that day, and Flays Reserve was my go-to place rather than the beach. That was my priority, to see Flays Reserve and a place that was called Parrot Park near the Miami chairlift, for those that can remember that far back.
And what was it about bird watching, Mick, that, can you remember that first sort of fascination or that first feeling of love of watching birds? Can you remember?
I think the caged owls at Flays Reserve really resonated with me, and I've always had an interest in the birds of prey, including the owls. The fact that the field guides back then were pretty ordinary, and I just questioned where all these birds were, so I'll elaborate on that if you like now. Or,
yeah, tell me about it.
Yeah, so for years and years, the main one was What Bird Is That by Neville Cayley, and the drawings and that were, or the pictures and that weren't that good for a lot of species, and it didn't have distribution maps from memory. But anyway, Peter Slater brought out a field guide, just part one with all the non-song birds, the ducks and the hawks and that, and I started to see the distribution. I'm thinking they're not found in Toowoomba, even though the distribution map said they were. And my biggest revelation was joining the bird club in 1975. Oh, it started in 75, I joined in 79, and realised, they are here, you just have to go to the right habitat, so you don't get everything in your backyard.
So, I mean, this is not a rude question, but what sort of age were you at that stage?
That was
a teenager? Or?
I was 17 then, but I'd spent a lot of time in the library getting books out on overseas field guides. At one stage I was thinking I was going to write down every species in the world. I soon gave that up. But I just had an active interest in all things bird, and particularly the stories about the prehistoric birds and the birds that had become extinct.
Well, I was going to ask you about that, and I'll ask you about it now. So the theory that birds have evolved from dinosaurs, do you know very much about that?
I'm a real believer in creation, and I think there's a lot of questions that I won't even try to answer because it's way beyond my understanding, and I think that there's just too much diversity in the world to be explained by simple evolution. There's some processes go on, I'm sure, at a much smaller scale, but I think there was a great creator.
All right, well, we might steer away from the philosophical questions, do you think, Mick, and go back to the birds. When you joined that bird club at 17, you must have been dragging the average age down to about 75, were you? Or what did they think about this young Mick turning up there?
Well, it was interesting because I was probably one of the younger members, and I have to have a laugh because Mum knew that I'd rung up the club and she'd overheard the conversation with the secretary of the club at that time, and her name was Anne Shaw, and Mum obviously thought Anne had a very lovely voice. She said, she's got a voice like a lark, and she must have thought there was a potential mate there for me, and dear old Anne was probably 70 plus at that age. She was a lovely English lady, so this is just a little an aside.
Del was matchmaking you with one of the bird lovers. Yes.
But I remember Bill Jolly, who founded the club, my brother Simon, who you know, and I and myself and Dad were in Redwood Park, and we'd found a young bird called a russet-tailed thrush, or white's thrush back then, before they renamed it. And this wasn't a species that was on the list for the Toowoomba Birds at that time. And my brother, not thinking anything of it, had caught one of these chicks. So we arrive at this, I think it was their annual general meeting down at Withcotton, saying, "Oh, we actually caught the chicks." And that was a new species for the club. And I think they were all aghast that these new members of the club were actually going around catching young birds. So
tell me how. What did you take it into the meeting in? Did you have it in a box or in a cage? Or?
Oh no, we just let it go. But the fact that we had actually caught this bird, and these new members were catching birds in the wild, wasn't really what bird watching was about.
They sit you down and they said, number one rule, do not catch the birds.
Yeah, well, he was a bit innocent, Simon. He didn't understand that was part of the rules.
Well, that was going to be a question that I was going to ask you later on, about should people keep birds as pets?
Look, birds raised from captive stock, no problems. That's given a lot of joy to a lot of people, and the same with cats and dogs for that matter. So I don't, I wouldn't own one myself, because my enjoyment is actually seeing them in the wild and showing people where these birds are and how to find them, and educating the public on conservation matters and the need for a lot more research in certain species, and the damage that's done with some of our practices that we might think are fairly innocuous, or won't matter because they'll just go somewhere else, and we know for a fact that that's not the case.
So, Mick, are you talking about elimination of habitat, or what sort of thing? Are you talking about feeding birds, or?
Well, let's talk about feeding birds. I mean, you can overfeed birds, but I think birds have got a far better idea of what a balanced diet is than most humans, and so long as they don't become dependent on you, and you're a bit judicious about how much you put out and maybe how frequently you put it out. The birds at home, they know that if I'm outside and I don't whistle, there's no feed coming today. So I probably do it every other day. I haven't fed them for 5 days at this present time, but that's only because I ran out of birdseed. So that's one example. The other thing is people don't necessarily understand the damage that they do to, say, lorikeets with the brush on the tongue. If they just give them hard seed all the time, it wears the bristles off the brush of their tongue, so they're blossom feeders. So you have to be a bit sensible about how often you put out seed. I know people will disagree with me, but I think there's a balance, like with everything in life. Yep.
And what about that loss of habitat or the changing climate? Tell me about that, and in terms of birds and what you've seen here on the Darling Downs on that are no longer around, or? Yes.
Okay. There's been a few species over the years that have declined or have essentially become locally extinct. One of the main ones we're concerned about is the red goshawk, which is a bird of prey, which has effectively disappeared from southeast Queensland, northern New South Wales. You have to generally go up to Cape York and the Northern Territory to be any chance of seeing one of those, but that's a particularly rare one.
Do you know what the reason for that is?
There's been a lot of habitat modification, but there's no clear answer for that particular species around here, because other birds of prey have survived quite well, and they've all got the same habitat or similar habitat. So that one's the subject of research by a local, Chris McColl, who is doing his research on that at the moment, and other people in the past. Rod Hobson has done work on that as well from the local area. The habitat destruction on the escarpment, we've had this the mountain bike issue, and we were grateful that the council finally decided that wasn't a good idea to put it through what is arguably our best habitat as far as bird diversity, specialist species, and also from a bird tourism potential, wildlife tourism in general. Any council would be very jealous of Toowoomba to have such good habitat right on their doorstep, and we believe that there's plenty of scope to promote wildlife tourism in the future. I mean, you have an airport. The planets have aligned in a lot of ways for Toowoomba, but the fact is that bird watchers have been coming to the Lockyer and the Darling Downs and Toowoomba area forever and a day for certain species, and we now have the opportunity to do a bit more on that, and that's my hope in the coming years that I will be able to help that.
And Mick, in the contrary, what birds are now here that weren't here before? Yes,
there's a very good it's a paper that was done over 60 years by Lord. His name was Lord. He lived at Murphy's Creek, on the birds of the Murphy's Creek district. So I'm now in the Lockyer Valley, but it's very relevant to a lot of the Toowoomba area and the escarpment. That shows some species weren't recorded up until 61 that are quite prevalent now. Some of those introduced species, like the common myna, for instance, we seem to have species that have colonised Toowoomba over the time that the large grevilleas started to appear. The robin gordons and the Sandra gordons. Those are loved by two species in particular, the blue-faced honeyeater and the red wattlebird, which I know when I started bird watching were very rare in Toowoomba, but now both species are quite common over the whole of town. And we're just seeing the appearance of, and I'd be interested to hear of anyone that's has red wattlebirds in the Highfields area, because we can see that they're potentially going to move through that area now too. They've been recorded there, but I'm not sure that there's many there. Another species that's what we would call a feral native, the long-billed corella. If you go out to Highfields, Peacehaven Park, you'll see that there's long-billed corellas, which are a bird that would traditionally only be found down around Victoria and South Australia, but satellite populations have bred up from aviary escapees, and then those birds have established new colonies. So there's plenty happening, nothing static in the bird world, and if there's a void, something tends to fill it.
I can understand that. So I can understand when you say about when you were talking about the first example, that's because this certain type of grevilleas were introduced. Are they like garden plants or something, and then became popular? Or?
The cultivars, they planted a lot. I think it was from I'm happy to be corrected, but from maybe the mid-80s, that really became a popular plant throughout, not just Toowoomba, but everywhere. And Toowoomba already had blue-faced honeyeaters and red wattlebirds there, but I think just on the eastern escarpment for the red wattlebirds and down around Duggan Park was about the only place you could be guaranteed of seeing it. But slowly and surely over time they spread. Satin bowerbird's another good example. I think it'd be interesting to know how many people in Toowoomba actually got a bower in their yard. You would be surprised. We had one over at DPI where I used to work. People in Holberton Street had them. Then you had people in Geddy Street, all around Toowoomba, but not always was the case.
Now this is going to show my alarmingly terrible lack of knowledge. Bowerbirds are the ones that collect the blue things, are they?
There's two species of bowerbird around here. The Regent bowerbird, the yellow and black one that they advertise Lamington National Park with. You don't have to go to National Park. You just have to go to Prince Henry Drive early in the morning and take a walk, and you're a good chance of seeing one. Or in Redwood Park. And the satin bowerbird, which is the one you're referring to, decorates its bower, which is not its nest. It's its avenue for courting, and its blue objects, particularly blue pegs and the lids of bottled milks and milk bottles and the rings, they say there was a bit of an issue. They found out that the ring could be causing strangulation or something if it got caught around the neck. So I think they modified things. So,
do we know why it's blue? Why they love blue things? No.
Each bowerbird each species seems to have a preference for a certain colour. Like there's the region bowerbird, I think, is more white objects. Correct. I'm happy to be corrected that I've only seen one of their bowers in my life, and that was mostly white objects. There's one further west, the western bowerbird, and the one further north, the great bowerbird. I think they've got a penchant for paler objects, and not definitely not blue objects.
That's so fascinating, isn't it?
It is,
incredible.
Yeah. And that's a species that I'd not seen in the Lockyer Valley, and I've been bird watching a long time. I'd not seen it, but one turned up in my yard at Murphy's Creek just recently, New Year's Day actually, and I watched it, and it was collecting sticks, and I found that it's nesting in the neighbour's yard. So, birds are continually either disappearing from places or setting up, extending their territories.
So, Mick, when you said earlier that about feeding the birds and you go outside and you whistle, so does that mean that the same birds are living around your place, or do they go off somewhere? And how do birds?
Well, I think there's so many people that actually put out seed that some birds just know to do the rounds of the neighbourhood, and that's probably the case around the Murphy's Creek area as well. But your question is, are they always there depending on people, or?
Yeah, the same birds. Do they live in an area? So there obviously some are migratory and some aren't.
Yeah, so they're very seasonal subset of species, but the pigeons and the lorikeets and that around home seem to be there all year, but in different numbers. Like we've just had a huge bloom of the Kadaji, and they love that. So we've even had musk lorikeets down around home, which is not normal. They've invaded the area, so they're very opportunistic, nomadic, following the resources that are there. But there would be always a subset around home that know that this is a bit of a sanctuary. We don't have cats or dogs. Well, we do have dogs, but they're not going to bother the birds. So we have bronzewings, we have bar-shouldered doves, crested pigeons, little corellas, sulphur-crested cockatoos, galahs, king parrots would come in almost daily, if not daily. Yeah.
I'll just remind the listeners that they're on 102.7 FM, and we're on Big Little Small Talk with me, Megan O'Hara-Sullivan, and we're talking to Mick Atzeni, who is a bird observer. He's the president of the Toowoomba Bird Observers, in fact, and we're talking about all things bird. So I read this quote, Mick, bird watching changes the way you look at the world. It truly is the gateway drug to environmental awareness. Would you agree with that?
I think that's a very fair comment, particularly those that have done a lot of travel overseas as well, birding, and birding is a burgeoning industry, particularly some of the places like Costa Rica and all those South American countries, Africa. They thrive on wildlife tourism, and bird tourism is a separate thing. But if you go around enough, you can see that it is a bit of a barometer of the health of different countries, I suppose, that actually value their wildlife and know what side their bread's buttered on. And I think the African nations completely understand that.
What happens to birds in places where it's heavily polluted,
Well, you would be surprised, because some of the best bird watching spots are the sewage treatment plants, and we were monitoring, say, the Wairema treatment plant had a set of settling ponds there before they converted it to a pump station, but there was a perfect example, human waste being treated, and it was a real haven there for a lot of because of the nutrient. I'm saying this is human treatment. We haven't got hospital runoff or anything like that that's going to contaminate it. But there is environmental damage, and a lot of dams potentially aren't as good as they could be.
What about air quality in places where the air quality is poor?
I don't. I mean, I've done a lot of air quality research as part of my job with DPI in the past, but that doesn't necessarily equate to, well, from my knowledge, and I'm happy to be corrected there, birds leaving an area because of pollution or whatever. It's mainly the food and water as the main ingredients. So this is why we need to, be mindful of what we're doing. Australia, overall, I think is a pretty good country as far as not polluting. We do a lot of silly, unnecessary clearing. I don't think there's a lot of thought put in some areas in particular where there's been wholesale clearing without thought for the loss of biodiversity and also key species that potentially bring money to the area for tourism.
When you're talking about all those birds at your place, do they all live harmoniously, or do they fight between species?
Oh, there's definitely a pecking order once you put the seed out, and that's just normal. The rosellas are a bit pensive when the lorikeets tend to be the bully boys, the rainbow lorikeets, and certainly the sulphur-crested cockatoos. But I don't put it in a tray. I mean, I do have trays and I put a little bit in, but most of mine is I just throw it out in the courtyard and make them work for it, and then they can't be everywhere at once to push their competition away. So I think that's a better technique, and you get to enjoy their natural behaviour a bit more instead of seeing a contrived situation which wouldn't normally happen in the wild.
That was another question I had, is are all birds vegetarian?
No.
No. Well, I suppose they eat worms and things too, don't
No,
they?
well, obviously you've got your birds of prey, so they take live mammals and birds. A lot of people are familiar with frogmouths, and they think that they might be owls, but if you ever watch a frogmouth, it hunts with its mouth, not its claws, so it's not a bird of prey, and they tend to take moths. I think they have been known to take frogs and that sort of thing, but generally they're an insect eater, and that's why you'll see them around street lights, and that's why a lot get hit. They sit on the road and sitting ducks for a vehicle, which is unfortunate. But yes, and some birds will omnivores will eat meat and also grain. And I even read a story where someone had trained their, and this is not a good story, rainbow lorikeets were eating mince.
Well, I was going to ask you, because you always hear about people feeding the magpies mince. Is that's bad?
Well, look...
and why do people do that?
I think... this is the debate on whether you should or shouldn't, and I know that meat can get lodged under, say, a kookaburra's tongue and rotted out. If you talk to any of the wildlife carers, they would not encourage feeding of mince. I tend to sit on the fence with some things, and this one is a bit of common sense as to how often you do it, and a bit of educating yourself about it so that you're not being silly about it. There's a lot of opinion out there, Megan, about many things, as you know, and I think it's up to everyone to do their critical research and do their research, a bit of critical thinking, and put yourself in the place of the animal, or the bird, and what would you think that was healthy for yourself, or
it's a tricky one, though. I don't know that I'd go around eating insects off the road either. So I like the frogmouth.
We've intruded into their habitat, and a lot of birds and animals have actually adapted well, and One of the interesting ones is the powerful owls, and we're blessed to have powerful owls in the local area, and they hunt possums, and of course, that's one of their prey, and we've created a lot of possum habitat because we've got our houses and that on the escarpment and places to hide. And it's interesting that the research that the Powerful Owl Project, of which some of our members are part of, has revealed. So the numbers, for a start, are far greater, but then there's other species that aren't getting funding, aren't treated as endangered or vulnerable, that I would argue are. And this is always the issue. There's species that keep flying under the radar and not getting the attention they need. And Toowoomba is blessed in that we get migrations from the north, from the south. We get the inland species coming in during drought, and we get a good mix of a lot of species. So over, say, a 20-kilometre radius of the CBD here, we've recorded 305 species officially over the years.
Well, I read somewhere where there was over 300 species here on the Darling Downs, but we're up to 305 now. Yeah. So tell me about the census. Like, I was reading that that's what you guys do as part of your thing. So you need to know your spangled drongo from your fairy martin, from your tree martin, from your Australasian pipit. But what does a census involve?
Well, the Toowoomba Bird Observers charter is to encourage the study and observations of the birds of the Toowoomba area. So that takes into account the lockyer, bits of the lockyer, and out on the downs, as I said earlier. We, as citizen scientists, would like to get a snapshot in time each year of the diversity in the area. So that gives us, so we've been going for nearly, it will be 50 years in 2 years, next year, 50 years. So the annual census is just it was a way to get members involved, to get to know the area a bit better, and also to have that longitudinal data that we could say, okay, well, we were recording these species all the time at this time of year, but now we don't get them at all, or once upon a time we never used to see them, but now we are, or under certain conditions like drought, we'll get them, but we won't get them outside of drought. So it's just a part of our education, and also it's a fun thing to do. We also do an annual raptor census in July, and or was it June? I can't remember, but it doesn't matter. So north, south, east and west of Toowoomba, and that's done in a formal set route, and we've got that data being analysed at the moment. So it's probably the most comprehensive bird of prey data set by a bird group that we're aware of, and that's why these researchers, Chris McColl and Jared Cath from the university, are doing a bit of a paper on that. So it's, whilst we didn't know what the benefit would be when we started these things, it's starting to fall into place, and people are also using these eBird and bird data now to record their sightings. So there's instantaneous feedback to the wider community, because someone sees a rare bird, say there's a good example is Pratten Coals. There's a oriental Pratten Coals turned up down in the Lockyer Valley about a year ago, and I just can't think how many people went to see that bird, because it was probably only about the fourth record for southeast Queensland. Yeah. So
how do they know where to find it though?
Well, the people report them so they know that it's 7 Mile Lagoon, for instance, down in the Lockyer, or even out at Norwin and those areas out on the... We've got Australian Pratten Coal being seen out there at the moment, so everyone's in the know now, and they all go and get their photo for the year or their tick for the year, and this is how bird tourism works. And this is what I was saying earlier. We have a perfect opportunity to get our piece of the pie and capitalise, also to help the providers of accommodation understand how to attract bird watchers. So sort of helping one of our local accommodation providers target bird watchers to their area for.
I would imagine
Pooby Dam's a good one
yeah,
too.
Pooby, yeah. It'd be a double-edged sword. You don't want people sort of going and making noise or disturbing them. And
it's a good point. You can have some species just get too much attention, but generally speaking, bird watchers, are sensible and they know that you don't do that, and particularly. Breeding season for some of the rarer species. It's like the powerful owl project. We don't tell people if we know where the hollow is. That's on a need to know basis, and that's part of the conditions. If you're in this powerful owl project, that you're very judicious about who knows where the hollow is. But lots of people have enjoyed the powerful owls around Toowoomba because of. We've been able to show them outside the vulnerable season, and it's a blessing to have them. So we need to look after them, and that's why we like to be consulted if there's going to be any sort of development, because you may not be aware of what we're already aware of, and if things happen by accident, we've seen some mistakes made over the years, and also some lack of communication where habitats that were important have been either diminished or completely wrecked.
I'll just remind the listeners, and thank you for being with us today on Big Little Small Talk. You're with me, Megan O'Hara-Sullivan, and we're with Mick Atzeni, who's the president of the Toowoomba Bird Observers. Mick, let's talk about bird behaviours, and this I think is the most fascinating thing, that the way that birds communicate. They might be calling and responding, and I did come to a lecture that you had there, and it was about Albert's lyrebird, Anna Fernley,
yes,
in October. And what's kind of the most unusual? Well, probably there's nothing unusual about any bird behaviour, but is that something that you find fascinating as well as the look of them, the communication between birds?
I think it's very important as a bird watcher that you actually know the calls. Obviously, that's part and parcel of making your job easier. Understanding when certain calls are given is a different skill, and a lot of birds have got a song and also a contact call, and even an alarm call. Everyone's probably aware of the noisy miners or the Mickey birds. So they will always go off if there's a bird of prey or a goanna or a snake, and that's great for bird watchers. That's probably the only blessing of the noisy miner. They're a very aggressive bird and chase everything away, but that's another conversation. But that's an example of why they use their different calls. And when you're out bird watching, often there'll be nothing, and then all of a sudden there will be a group of different species all coming through together, and you'll hear all their little calls. It's contact calling, and we think. What
does the contact calling
Well,
mean?
we think that's just keeping everyone informed. We're here, we're here, we're here, we're here, and then of course if there's a predator or something, the call changes to an alarm call, and then all the birds, potentially benefit from knowing. Okay, well, that honeyeater is now giving an alarm call. Or beware, so they're just simple examples. There's of course the courtship songs, and the birds of paradise and the bowerbirds are some of the best examples of that, if you've ever been able to witness the bowerbirds displaying. And there's also I got tricked because we had our AGM one year, and Roger Yainch from BirdLife Australia offered to run a bird quiz, and Roger's got a lot of experience in water birds. He was a professional ornithologist and did a lot of research on water birds, and because of his job, it was important for him to learn the calls of the water birds, where we don't tend to take much notice of that because they're so visual. They're not sitting in trees, they're out on the lake, and you just have to identify them by physical attributes rather than hearing them. And that was an eye opener for me, that I really didn't know much about waterbird calls. The sound of a pink-eared duck, or a hoary-headed grebe, or a rufous night heron. So your question is a good question, and if you've got enough interest in all that, what do they call it, acoustics, and how you record all that is also another science as well. And the interesting thing, there's a lot of birds that have dialects. So the pied currawong is a good example. If you go to another part of the country, its call is slightly different. And pied butcherbird, everyone's familiar with pied butcherbirds, beautiful songster, and a lady, Gloria Glass, was in our club for many years, and she recorded a lot of their songs, and she found out that no two had exactly the same song. And these things, until you do the research, you probably don't actually pick up on. So even monitoring for some of these more cryptic species now that are threatened, perhaps, they're using audio moths, where they've trained software to recognise the call, say, of the powerful owl, and tease that out from all the background noise. And if arguably you could do that for any species, but that saves someone actually going out. You just got to run it through the software, and it says, okay, I think I heard a male powerful owl there, and you can go and validate it. So this artificial intelligence, machine vision, recordings and picking out sounds is all part of the research these days.
Well, I think when Anna was talking, and she was showing us some footage of the Albert's lyrebird that is notoriously shy and really hard to capture for people to see, and what a game changer these cameras are now, that you can... Is that sort of something fairly new? Cameras that you can set up these time-lapse things? Or
wildlife cameras have been around for a long time. Their quality is getting better, and I think the capability to, say, load up to the 4G network or whatever is has been looked at, but I'm not sure if that's been perfected at this point. But it certainly is a very cost-effective way, and I did some research for DPI using machine vision to detect waterfowl on poultry farms with a company in Warwick, Vigilance Technologies, in collaboration. And it's the way to go, for lots of applications, not just research, but for feral animal control, and they've already done a lot of that sort of stuff, but there's plenty of scope for those wanting to take it to the next level. So all these tools are valuable for bird conservation and research, and I'd love to be, doing some of that stuff for some of the species as well. And hopefully, with pushing a bit of wildlife tourism and networking with the right people, Toowoomba can potentially be a bit of a leader in that area, because we have so much expertise in a lot of different areas of natural history, and also technology. We've got the USQ here for a start, and it would be great to see a lot more emphasis put on monitoring our wildlife assets and actually putting an economic value on our wildlife assets, so that we can move forward and be competitive with those that have already gone down that track. So,
Mick, have you ever met a bird that you didn't like, or that you were afraid of?
A bird that I'm afraid of?
Don't like the bird so much?
No, but I can... I mean, we've introduced species here, and I know that they compete. So I think one of our biggest mistakes was the common myna, the flying cane toad, because it's a hollow. It nests in hollows, and it competes. And hollows are already, in short supply. And I've heard stories of them evicting pale-headed rosellas and other things. So a lot of it goes unnoticed, because birds are discreet anyway when they're nesting, and I think we sort of missed the boat in trying to knocked them back in a lot of areas where we could have stopped it.
Why were they introduced, miners?
They were introduced to control another pest. I've got a feeling they were sort of like a follow-up from the cane toad. My memory's shocking.
Right.
So I won't try and elaborate. They were a form of pest control, and I not. Sorry, you might have that.
Yeah. What about famous bird watchers? I read that Jimmy Carter, Jonathan Franz, and the authors, very famous bird watchers. You're probably not interested in those people. They're probably not serious enough for you. Bird watchers? No? Okay, let's go to another topic. What about flightless birds? What do you think about flightless birds?
Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Because we've got our emu, and America's got, or South America's got the rhea, and the ostrich over in Africa, and the dodo, of course, went extinct. So why?
Kiwis, penguins?
There's a few more, and they're all vulnerable because we've introduced predators one way or another. Although the emu and the ostrich and the cassowary all got size to them, so they're fairly safe. But why would flightless birds evolve? You know, I don't know the answer to that, but they.
Another interesting part. I listened to a thing on the radio the other day about ostrich racing. Have you ever heard about someone riding an ostrich?
I have heard of that, and I've seen pictures, but I've not followed the ostrich races. I'm a lousy punter as it is, so
don't want to be going on that. Well, I also read that the cassowary is Australia's heaviest bird, and it's the second heaviest in the world after the ostrich. Cassowaries are pretty dangerous birds, aren't they?
They have been known to. I think there's one documented example of them killing someone with, because you don't want to, like all mothers, they protect their chicks, and I'm not sure if the cassowary is the male defends the chicks, because I know the male emu takes over from the female. But yes, if you get in their space, that's their defence mechanism. You happen to get that big claw in the wrong place, well, it is potentially lethal. So common sense prevails. So I think they're very aware of that up north in the tourism areas where cassowaries roam, and everyone's heard that story. So.
What about the smartest birds? Which are the smartest birds, Mick? They talk about those cockatoos opening bin lids and all of that. Yes,
they've got crows that can make fish hooks or hooks. There's plenty of videos, I think, on that one. There is, I think, the cockatoo family is extraordinarily intelligent. Magpies. You probably saw the movie Bloom, and where helped with the lady in the surfer that became paraplegic, I think, and they just seem to have an innate ability to connect with humans. Some birds, I'm not saying all of them. A lot of people have owned cockatoos for years, and macaws and these sorts of birds. They get very attached, and I think a friend of mine's got an Amazon parrot, and he often tells me all the stories about how they interact, and it hates women apparently. No, that's an exaggeration, but he's much more fond of dad than mum.
It's an interesting thing. Now you talk about the crows, because I don't know whether you know that we've been having an issue with crows at our place. So we went away for the weekend, which has happened to us before, and when we come back the crows are flying into our windows. But this time, and it's gone on for 2 weeks, they keep flying, and I understand because it's mating season, they're flying, they think it's a competitor, and they're flying at the windows and smashing into the windows at first light at 4:15 or 4:30 in the morning, which you can imagine has just about sent me around the twist. And so the only thing that we've been able to do to get rid of them is for me to put my big corflutes up in the windows.
Well, that's worked.
That's worked. So if crows are so smart, why would they keep smashing into a window?
That's a very good question, and I cannot understand why crows continue to be fooled by glass, but I guess that image on the reflection is just fighting back harder and harder, and it just, you know how something does your head in, and why is it getting more aggressive to me?
Yeah. So was it only crows?
No, peewees are notorious for it as well, particularly pecking at side mirrors on cars, and black-faced cuckoo shrikes. I think one of my mates had a problem with that one. Wrens are always, checking themselves out in the. If you might even see a wren land on your side mirror one day, and they're not as aggressive towards themselves, but you'd think they would learn, or maybe they're just looking at how good they are.
Oh, that's what they say. There's a good-looking rooster. Yeah. What about butterflies? Do you love butterflies too?
Love butterflies, and was a butterfly collector once upon a time. Yep.
All right, like little pins on a.
Yeah, well, we had to do that for school projects, and then when I did my biology degree, you had to know your butterfly specimens as well, and I took an interest in butterflies in the local area when a group of us were surveying what was up on tabletop, because in the breeding season butterflies hilltop, so they'll go to the highest point to do their courtship flight. So tabletop was a nice high point, and it was quite funny. These I think there was four grown men walking up this track with butterfly nets, and these kids coming down. You're a bit old for that, but
I think it's delightful. I'm running out of time. I'm going to get them in quickly. Would you ever eat a bird?
I love chook.
Chook's a bird.
Yeah, no, I don't go out of my way to eat, emu or anything like that. It's just me. It's not that I see anything wrong with it. But chicken and all that, of course, I eat the normal domestic birds. But I would
order a sparrow or something. What do they
serve
you up? No.
I mean, I'm sure they all taste fine. And my dad he feels awfully guilty about some of the things he used to do as a kid. Growing up around Ingham up north and that. And
Shanghai?
Oh, they used to.
Like that?
Well, yes. One story he tells me there's a bird called the white-breasted wood swallow, but up there the kids used to call them dummy martins, because they'd have their Shanghai and these birds just cluster on the power lines in a group, and he would shoot one and they'd just watch that one fall down and not realise what was going on with this being Shanghaied, and he confessed to that. He's also eaten a few wild ducks and busted, the plains turkeys. But all those rules have changed, since then. You can't do that anymore. And
well, that's probably a good place for us to have circled back to your lovely father, Laurie. So in my last couple of minutes that I've got left, listeners will know that I asked two questions. One is, what's the song that can't keep you off the dance floor, Mick?
Well, I'm a sack of potatoes on the dance floor, but I'm a half good dancer if you play sway, because I actually know how to do the Sally Ann cha-cha. So Jenny and I always get up to any music that you can do the Sally Ann cha-cha to, and that particular song.
What's Sway?
Sway by Michael Bublé.
Oh.
Yeah, so...
Blueberry Man.
Well,
I'm no judgment, Mick. No judgment.
No, that's just one of the best songs to do that dance to.
Yeah. Do you go dancing? Go to dances?
I used to love going to bush dances before, while I was a teenager, and folk dances, and then years later, I started going to dancing lessons, and that was one of the dances that Jenny and I particularly like doing, and as I said, I'm not a good dancer, but Jenny is, and thank God for that.
That's right. All right, my last question then, in the dying minutes of our show, is royals. Do you follow the royal family, or do you have a past? Who is your favourite royal, Mick?
I'm not a royal follower, but I really connected, I guess, with the whole thing that Diana was going through with the publicity when she didn't like publicity, and then it was like to me, such a B grade movie unfolding later, and eventually, that took her life because it was just too much, and I remember when she died, I was absolutely gutted. She was also an attractive woman, and how she was so good with some of her benevolent works that she did. And I thought, well, you've got the balance right. And I know she had some mental health issues, and I understand. We all have our own health issues, and some of them are more traumatic than others, and I think that life was particularly important for everyone to understand, and to be judgmental about it is bad, because you just didn't have all the facts, So I would always go to her, and no other royal has actually really captured my imagination. I love the fact that Mum, for instance, loves the Queen that passed, Queen Elizabeth, and I've bought her books on that, but I've not read those. I just like the fact that Diana was a tragic life, but also a good life from a lot of different aspects. Mm-hmm.
Who's the royal, or who's the king of the birds?
The king of the birds for me, because it's been such has been the red goshawk here. Okay, so I mentioned the story earlier. There is a bird that I would love to find that has been declared extinct, but weirder things have happened, and that's the paradise parrot.
So the paradise parrot might be the king, or the royal, the jewel in the crown.
Well, you could write your own ticket. You could retire forever if you got evidence that the paradise parrot was still alive. There's only one bird that hasn't been photographed in Australia, and that's the buff-breasted button quail up north. So that would be another one that I would be quite happy as a second choice.
Well, Mick, it's just been lovely speaking with you. I can see the joy on your face when you talk about the birds, and we haven't even gone into the beauty of them when you see a little line of black around, just the colours, and how could they be so beautiful? And it must be part of the fascination, I suppose. So,
well, the biggest joy about birds is sharing it with others, and that's the relational side of it. The bird watching is therapy for sure, but the greater gift of birds is the fact that you can share a shared experience with and show someone something different, and have them and witness their aha moments and awakenings. So that's probably given me more joy over the years than seeing birds for myself. Yeah.
Well, on that beautiful note, I will say thank you, Mick, for being my guest on Big Little Small Talk, and full power to you, I think.
It's been a pleasure, and thanks very much, Megan.
That's it for this week. Thanks for joining me on Big Little Small Talk. I hope you can make the time to join me next week. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on your favourite podcast app.